Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching from and what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoy hearing this story. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's drift into a peaceful slumber together. This time I will tell you about Robin Hood. Let's get started. The Sherwood Forest and a hero. The sun was setting over Sherwood Forest, painting the sky in deep strokes of orange and red. The thick canopy of leaves rustled softly in the evening breeze, whispering secrets that only the trees could understand. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs fading as the night began to claim the land. The forest, ancient and vast, had stood for centuries, sheltering creatures both noble and wicked. But none had ever made it their home quite like Robin Hood. He stood atop a moss-covered rock, gazing out into the dense woodland, his sharp green eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The Sherwood Forest was more than just a hiding place for him. It was his kingdom, a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. He had long since abandoned his title as Robin of Locksley, the son of a nobleman. That life had been taken from him, burned to the ground along with his family estate. What remained of that boy had disappeared into the smoke, and from the ashes rose a man who would be remembered for generations. The night air carried the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder that the wilderness had its own rulers. But tonight, the forest belonged to Robin Hood and his merry men, a band of outcasts, thieves, and fugitives who had sworn loyalty not to a king, but to a cause. They sat around a roaring fire, their laughter echoing through the trees as they shared stolen bread and roasted venison. "Tell us again," Robin, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, grinned, biting into a piece of meat. "How did you end up in this merry company of ours?" Robin chuckled, running a hand through his messy, chestnut-colored hair. "Ah, Little John," he said, addressing the man, who was anything but little. "You've heard it before." "I," said Friar Tuck, a stout man in a monk's robe, sipping from a flask of mead. "But it never grows old." Robin sighed, staring into the flickering flames. "Very well," he said, his voice softer now, touched with something close to sorrow. "Once upon a time, I was a different man. I lived in a grand estate, with a father who believed that justice was more than just words spoken by the powerful. He taught me that a nobleman's duty was not to hoard wealth, but to protect those who had none." The men fell silent, listening intently. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. "But not all noblemen think that way," Robin continued. "Prince John and his lapdogs, especially the Sheriff of Nottingham, saw my father's kindness as a weakness. They accused him of treason, though his only crime was refusing to raise taxes on starving villagers. One night, they came for him. The sheriff's men set fire to our home. My father fought bravely, but they cut him down like an animal. There was a heaviness in his voice, a weight of old wounds that had never truly healed. I barely escaped," Robin admitted, his fingers tightening into fists. "I fled into the night, a hunted man. My name, my title, my land, all gone. But I was not the only one cast aside by a world ruled by greed. Here in Sherwood, I found others who had been wronged. And so, together, we swore an oath we would steal from the rich and give to the poor. We would be outlaws, but outlaws with honor." A murmur of approval spread among the men. They had all lost something to the sheriff's tyranny, and in Robin they had found not only a leader but a purpose. A rustling in the underbrush snapped everyone to attention. Instinctively, hands went to weapons, bows were drawn, daggers unsheathed. But Robin raised a hand, signaling them to wait. A moment later, a young boy stumbled into the firelight, his clothes tattered, his face streaked with dirt. "Please," the boy gasped. "They took my mother." Robin knelt before him, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "Who did?" "The sheriff's men," the boy sobbed. "They said we hadn't paid enough taxes. My mother begged for mercy, but they dragged her away." Robin's jaw tightened. This was not the first time he had heard such a story, and it would not be the last. But each time, it stoked the fire of justice burning inside him. "Where did they take her?" "The castle," the boy whispered. "They said she would stay in the dungeons until we could pay." Robin exchanged a glance with Little John, who gave a nod. "Then we shall pay the sheriff a visit," Robin said, standing. "Not with gold, but with arrows." A cheer erupted from the merry men as they sprang into action, dousing the fire and readying their weapons. Robin pulled his hood over his head, his emerald green cloak blending with the shadows of the forest. He slung his bow over his shoulder, a quiver full of arrows resting against his back. Sherwood had its share of ghosts, but none were more feared than Robin Hood. The wind carried his name through the trees as he and his men melted into the darkness, their mission clear. Tonight, the sheriff of Nottingham would learn once more that the people had a protector. The tyranny of the sheriff. The moon hung high over Nottingham, its silver glow casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. The town, once a thriving place of trade and laughter, had been reduced to silence and fear under the rule of the sheriff of Nottingham. The only sounds that broke the eerie stillness were the heavy boots of patrolling guards and the occasional wail from one of the prison cells beneath the castle. Inside the cold, damp dungeons of Nottingham Castle, a woman huddled against the stone wall, clutching her arms to ward off the chill. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, but her eyes, though weary, still burned with defiance. She was not the first to be locked away for failing to pay the sheriff's ever-increasing taxes, and she would not be the last. Above the castle, in his lavish chambers, the sheriff of Nottingham sat comfortably in a high-backed wooden chair, sipping from a goblet of rich, red wine. His fingers, adorned with rings stolen from desperate villagers, tapped idly against the armrest as he listened to the sounds of his men counting gold coins in the next room. "Another good haul today, my lord," said one of his tax collectors, entering the chamber and bowing low. The villagers are running out of excuses. Many have started paying without resistance. Fear is a powerful thing. The sheriff smirked. "It always is." He took another sip of his wine before setting the goblet down. "And the ones who cannot pay?" "Imprisoned, my lord, as per your orders. Though some of them are weak, they may not last long in the dungeons." The sheriff sighed dramatically, though his expression remained amused. "A shame. But if they cannot contribute to the kingdom's wealth, then they are of no use to me." He leaned forward, his voice darkening. "Well, the boy, did he run?" The tax collector hesitated. "Yes, my lord. He escaped into Sherwood." The sheriff's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening around the armrest. "Then we will have trouble soon," he muttered. He pushed himself to his feet and strode to the window, looking out toward the dark expanse of Sherwood Forest. Even from this distance, he could feel the presence of Robin Hood lurking among the trees. The outlaw had become a plague upon him, an insufferable thorn in his side. "He will come," the sheriff murmured to himself. "He always does." And indeed, in the heart of Sherwood, Robin Hood and his merry men were already making their plans. The camp had come alive with preparation. Arrows were fletched, swords were sharpened, and strategy was discussed in hushed voices. Robin stood at the center of it all, his hands resting on the great wooden table where a rough map of Nottingham Castle had been laid out. "Breaking into the castle is not the problem," Little John muttered, leaning over the map. "We've done it before. But getting out will be," Will Scarlet added. He was a sharp-witted fighter, dressed in deep red, his dagger spinning between his fingers. "The sheriff has doubled the guards since our last visit. If we get caught, it won't just be one of us rotting in the dungeons, it'll be all of us." Robin studied the map carefully, tracing the familiar paths with his finger. He knew Nottingham Castle well. He had visited it as a child when his family still had standing in the noble courts. But those halls were no longer his to roam freely. "We'll need a distraction," Robin finally said. His voice was calm, measured, his mind already working through a plan. Friar Tuck chuckled. "Leave that to me," he said, taking a swig from his flask. "The castle guards enjoy a good drink. A few barrels of stolen mead delivered at the right moment might just loosen them up." Robin smiled. "Then it's settled. We strike at midnight." The streets of Nottingham were deserted when the band of outlaws slipped silently through the alleys, their figures blending into the darkness. The castle loomed ahead, its torches flickering in the night breeze. Guards stood at the gates, spears in hand, their breath visible in the cold air. Then, just as planned, a cart rumbled toward the castle entrance, its driver wrapped in a thick cloak. 2 barrels sat in the back, and as it approached, the guards crossed their spears to stop it. "What's this?" one of them asked. The driver lifted his head, revealing Friar Tuck's round face beneath his hood. "A gift for the good men of Nottingham Castle," he said cheerfully. "Courtesy of a merchant grateful for your protection." The guards exchanged looks, then peered into the cart. The barrels certainly smelled of alcohol. One of the guards grinned. "A gift, eh?" "A generous one," Tuck assured them. "But you must be careful. It's strong, stronger than anything you've ever tasted." With a laugh, the guards waved him through, eager to take a share for themselves. Meanwhile, from the shadowed rooftops nearby, Robin Hood watched with satisfaction. The first step of the plan had worked. Now, as the guards indulged in their unexpected reward, he and his men would strike. They moved swiftly, scaling the stone walls with practiced ease. Robin was the first to reach the top, his bow already drawn. A single arrow whistled through the air, striking a torch near the guards' barracks and knocking it into a pile of dry hay. Flames leapt up, licking at the wooden beams. Shouts of alarm erupted as the guards scrambled to put out the fire, abandoning their posts. In the chaos, Robin and his men slipped into the castle undetected. The dungeon corridors were damp and foul-smelling, lined with heavy iron doors. Robin pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence as he peered into each cell, searching for the boy's mother. At last, he found her. She sat hunched in the corner, weak but still alive. Robin took out a small lockpick, working quickly to free the door. "We're here to take you home," he whispered. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with tears. She nodded weakly, and Little John scooped her up effortlessly. But before they could retreat, a voice rang out. "Stop them!" The sheriff's guards came pouring into the hallway, swords gleaming in the torchlight. Robin cursed under his breath, knocking an arrow to his bow. The first guard fell before he could raise his weapon, and then all at once, chaos erupted. Blades clashed, arrows flew, and the walls of the dungeon echoed with the sounds of battle. Will Scarlet fought fiercely beside Robin, while Little John used his great strength to clear a path through the guards. They had to get out. Robin shot out the nearest torch, plunging the corridor into darkness. The guards hesitated just long enough for the outlaws to slip away, racing up the stone stairs toward the outer walls. The town bells were ringing now, an alarm spreading through Nottingham. But Robin had planned for this. As they emerged into the courtyard, he let out a sharp whistle. From beyond the castle gates, a rope was thrown over the wall, tied to a sturdy oak outside. Without hesitation, Robin grabbed it, swinging across the gap. One by one, the others followed, until at last, the boy's mother was safely on the other side. With the guards still scrambling, Robin gave one last grin toward the castle. "Better luck next time, Sheriff," he murmured, then vanished into the forest. Behind him, Nottingham Castle was in an uproar. But in the depths of Sherwood, the outlaws celebrated another victory. The poor had won again, if only for tonight. The sheriff's vow of vengeance. The sound of the town bells still echoed through Nottingham Castle long after Robin Hood and his men had vanished into the thick embrace of Sherwood Forest. The torches along the castle walls burned bright, casting nervous, flickering light over the shaken guards who had failed in their duty. Their expressions were grim, their armor dented, their pride shattered. At the highest tower of the castle, the Sheriff of Nottingham stood in silence, his gloved hands clenched behind his back. He stared out over the town below, his mind a storm of rage and humiliation. He had known Robin Hood would come, had expected it, had even prepared for it, and yet, once again, the outlaw had outwitted him. The door to the chamber burst open. One of his knights, Sir Guy of Gisborne, stepped inside, still wearing the dirt and sweat of battle. His sword was at his side, its blade nicked from the night's fight. He removed his helmet, revealing sharp, angular features and cold, calculating eyes. "My lord," Sir Guy said, his voice low with frustration, "he escaped again." The sheriff exhaled sharply through his nose. "I am aware," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "He humiliated us," Sir Guy continued. "He walks into your castle, frees a prisoner, cuts down your men, and leaves without a scratch. The people will talk. By morning, the entire town will know this, and they will laugh at us." The sheriff turned to face him. "Let them laugh," he said, his voice like ice. "It will make their suffering all the sweeter when I remind them who truly holds power in Nottingham." Sir Guy's frown deepened. "And what of Robin Hood?" The sheriff walked toward the grand table in the center of the chamber, where a large map of Nottinghamshire was spread out. His gloved hand traced the borders of Sherwood Forest, that cursed place that had become a sanctuary for outlaws and rebels. He had sent dozens of men into the woods to hunt Robin down, but few ever returned, and those who did came back empty-handed, speaking of shadows that moved like ghosts and arrows that flew from nowhere. Robin Hood was more than a man now. He was a legend, a symbol of hope to the poor and the desperate. And that made him dangerous. The sheriff's fingers curled into a fist. Robin Hood has made a fool of me for the last time, he said coldly. If we cannot capture him in the open, then we will bring Sherwood to its knees. Sir Guy's eyes gleamed with understanding. You mean to smoke him out? The sheriff smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. No more waiting. No more failed ambushes. We take the fight to him. The morning came with the scent of wet earth and fresh leaves in Sherwood. The merry men were already awake, tending to the camp, sharpening weapons, and preparing their morning meal. Laughter and chatter filled the clearing, as if the troubles of Nottingham Castle were worlds away. Robin Hood sat on a fallen log, his bow resting across his knees. He watched as the young boy, Thomas, whose mother they had rescued, ran through the camp, grinning for the first time since the night before. His mother sat nearby, speaking with Maid Marian, who had joined the outlaws in their cause. Marian, once a noblewoman of King Richard's court, had abandoned her life of luxury to stand against the sheriff's tyranny. Her long auburn hair was tied back, and she wore a green cloak similar to Robin's. She turned toward him now, her blue eyes full of warmth. Thomas will be safe here, she said softly, coming to sit beside him. And his mother, too. You did a good thing last night, Robin. Robin exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Perhaps. But every time we strike against the sheriff, I wonder how long our luck will last. Marian placed a hand on his. Luck has nothing to do with it. You fight because no one else will. The people believe in you. Robin glanced toward the forest beyond the camp. The trees stretched endlessly, providing both protection and uncertainty. The sheriff will not let this go unanswered, he murmured. Before Marian could reply, a loud horn blast shattered the peace of the morning. Every head in the camp snapped toward the sound. It came from the northern edge of Sherwood. Little John was the first to react. He grabbed his staff and strode toward the sound, his expression dark. That's not a hunting horn, he growled. That's a call to arms. Robin was already on his feet, bow in hand. Everyone, prepare yourselves. The merry men sprang into action, snatching up weapons and dousing the fires. Within moments, the camp that had been alive with laughter was now silent, hidden among the trees. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant trample of approaching boots. Robin and Little John climbed a thick oak tree, positioning themselves among the branches. From their vantage point, they saw the first of the sheriff's men emerge from the undergrowth, dozens of soldiers clad in chainmail and leather, their swords drawn. But behind them came something far worse. A cart carrying torches and oil barrels. Robin's blood turned cold. They mean to burn Sherwood, he whispered. Little John's fists clenched around his staff. Then we cannot let them. Robin knocked an arrow to his bow, his jaw set. No, we cannot. As the first torch was lifted toward the dry forest underbrush, Robin let his arrow fly. It struck the soldier's hand, sending the torch tumbling harmlessly to the dirt. The man let out a cry of pain, clutching his wound. The sheriff's men spun toward the trees, their eyes wide with alarm. And then, from the shadows, the merry men attacked. Little John leaped from his perch, landing like a thunderclap and swinging his staff in a powerful arc. will Scarlet emerge from the brush, daggers flashing in the morning light. Arrows rain from the trees, each one striking with deadly precision. Robin moves swiftly, weaving between the trees, loosing arrow after arrow. The sheriff's men fell into chaos, their plan of burning the forest forgotten in the wake of the ambush. Sir Guy of Gisborne, leading the charge, roared in frustration. "Find Hood. Bring me his head." Robin met his gaze from across the battlefield, a smirk playing at his lips. "You'll have to catch me first." With a final, well-placed shot, Robin shattered an oil barrel, spilling its contents across the forest floor. Then, as the sheriff's men rushed forward, he struck a torch with an arrow, sending it flying into the oil. Flames erupted, not in the forest, but in the soldier's path. Panic broke out among the sheriff's men. The fire roared between them and Sherwood, cutting off their retreat. Sir Guy barely managed to pull his horse away in time. He glared at Robin through the smoke. "This isn't over, Hood," he spat. Robin only grinned. "It never is." With that, he disappeared into the trees, his men following. The sheriff's army, defeated and humiliated, stumbled back toward Nottingham. Sherwood had been defended. For now, a price on his head. The battle at the edge of Sherwood Forest had ended in a decisive victory for Robin Hood and his merry men. The sheriff's forces had been forced to retreat, their plan to burn the forest thwarted by Robin's quick thinking and daring tactics. Yet even as the last embers of the fire died out, Robin knew their fight was far from over. The sheriff would not take this defeat lightly. He had been humiliated once again, and that meant only one thing: he would strike back harder than ever before. The castle was eerily quiet that evening. The halls, usually filled with the sound of clinking goblets and crude laughter, were empty, save for the soft footfalls of armored guards patrolling nervously. A heavy tension weighed in the air, as if the very stone walls of Nottingham Castle could sense the sheriff's growing rage. Inside his private chamber, the sheriff of Nottingham stood at his great wooden desk, staring down at the wax-sealed scroll before him. His expression was unreadable, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. Sir Guy of Gisborne stood nearby, his face still marked with dirt from the failed attack. His armor bore scratches from Robin Hood's men, and though he had escaped without injury, the sting of defeat weighed on him just as heavily as it did on the sheriff. "You should have let me kill him when I had the chance," Sir Guy growled. The sheriff finally exhaled, picking up the scroll. "Enough. We've wasted too much time chasing the thieving fox through the trees. He always escapes, always humiliates us. If we cannot kill him in battle, then we shall turn the people against him." Sir Guy frowned. "The people already fear us, but they revere Hood. He is their hero." The sheriff smirked. "For now." He unrolled the scroll, revealing a decree written in bold, precise lettering. With a flick of his wrist, he dipped his quill into an inkwell and signed his name at the bottom. Then, with a satisfied sigh, he leaned back. "This," he said, handing the parchment to Sir Guy, "is a bounty. As of this moment, Robin Hood is the most wanted man in all of England." Sir Guy scanned the decree, his lips curling into a smile. 1,000 gold pieces? A fortune, the sheriff agreed. Enough to make even the most loyal peasant turn on him. By tomorrow, these notices will be posted in every village, every town square, every tavern. "Thieves, bounty hunters, even his own so-called friends, they will all want him dead. Sir Guy grinned. The fox will soon find himself hunted. The news spread like wildfire. By morning, the bounty posters were nailed to every wall in Nottingham, hanging from trees along the road, and tacked onto the doors of taverns where desperate men gathered. Wanted, Robin Hood. For theft, rebellion, and treason against the crown. A reward of 1,000 gold pieces for his capture, dead or alive. The amount was staggering. 1,000 gold pieces was more than a farmer made in a lifetime. It was enough to buy land, build a home, and never work again. In the market square, a crowd had gathered around one of the posters, murmuring amongst themselves. "It's blood money," one man muttered. "No honest soul would betray Robin." "Aye, but a hungry one might," said another. 1,000 gold pieces, it's enough to feed an entire village for years. Hidden among the crowd, a cloaked figure read the notice with a deep frown. It was Maid Marian. She had come into Nottingham disguised as a commoner, hoping to gather supplies for Sherwood, but instead, she had stumbled upon the sheriff's newest weapon against Robin. She turned swiftly and slipped through the alleys toward the city gates. Robin had to know. Back in Sherwood, the morning had been peaceful until Marian rode into camp at full speed. Robin, who had been mending a broken bowstring, rose to his feet immediately. "Marian?" She leaped off her horse, breathless. "Robin, it's the sheriff. He's placed a bounty on you. A fortune." The merry men gathered around as Marian pulled a crumpled poster from her cloak, handing it to Robin. His green eyes scanned the words carefully, his expression unreadable. 1,000 gold pieces? Will Scarlet whistled lowly. "That's a price fit for a king." "It's a trap," Little John said darkly. "The sheriff knows he can't catch Robin himself, so he's letting greed do the work for him." Robin nodded, folding the poster and slipping it into his belt. "This changes everything. We have to be careful," Marian warned. "Even those we trust may be tempted by that much gold. A starving man doesn't think with honor, he thinks with his stomach." Robin sighed. "Then we shall be more cautious. No more careless raids. No more wandering into Nottingham unarmed." He looked at his men, his expression grave. "From this moment on, every one of us is a target. The sheriff won't stop until I am dead." The weight of his words settled over them. They had always lived as outlaws, but now, every step they took was more dangerous than before. By nightfall, the effects of the bounty were already clear. A group of mercenaries had been seen lurking near the edges of Sherwood. Rumors spread of men who whispered in taverns, speaking of plans to hunt down the legendary outlaw. Even the villagers, who had once been Robin's greatest supporters, grew hesitant. Fear had begun to take root. That night, as Robin sat alone beneath a great oak, Marian approached him. "You're thinking too much," she said softly, sitting beside him. Robin let out a dry chuckle. "And you don't think enough of the dangers we now face." Marian placed a hand on his. "We will face them together." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the wind rustling through the trees. Then, from the distance, came a sharp crack, the sound of a branch snapping. Robin tensed, his hand moving to his dagger. Marian's eyes darted toward the darkness beyond the trees. They were being watched. And Robin knew, with a sinking feeling in his chest, that this was only the beginning. Betrayal in the shadows. The night air in Sherwood Forest was thick with tension. The distant crack of a snapped branch had sent a shiver of warning through Robin's spine. He sat still, his senses sharpened, listening. Marian remained beside him, her fingers twitching near the small dagger hidden beneath her cloak. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, another sound. A rustling in the underbrush, the unmistakable whisper of someone moving through the trees. Robin rose slowly, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. "Who goes there?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge of danger in it. "Nothing." Then, a low voice answered from the darkness. "It's me." A figure stepped forward into the dim firelight, Alanadil, one of Robin's own men. A minstrel turned outlaw, Alan had joined the merry men months ago, bringing his sharp wit and even sharper knife with him. He was loyal, or at least Robin had thought so. But now, something in his face was different. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an uneasy seriousness. Robin relaxed only slightly. "Alan, what are you doing creeping through the shadows?" Alan hesitated. I needed to speak with you alone." Marian glanced at Robin before stepping back. "I'll give you privacy," she murmured. But her hand lingered near her weapon as she moved away. Robin folded his arms. "Speak, then." Alan shifted uncomfortably. "Robin, I've heard whispers. In the villages, the taverns. There are men looking for you, hunters, mercenaries, men with no allegiance except to gold. And the bounty the sheriff placed on your head." Robin nodded grimly. "I know. 1,000 gold pieces is enough to make any man turn against me." Alan looked down, his voice lower now. "Some of our own men are afraid. They say it's not just bounty hunters we have to worry about. There are rumors that the sheriff has spies, here, in Sherwood." Robin's expression darkened. "You think there's a traitor among us?" Alan swallowed. "I don't know. But I do know that someone in the village tipped off the sheriff about our last raid. He knew we were coming." Robin's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach churn. He trusted his men, but if one of them had betrayed him? "Who?" he asked simply. Alan hesitated. "I don't know for certain. But there's a name I keep hearing." Robin's green eyes locked onto him. "Tell me." Alan exhaled. Much the miller's son. Much had been one of the earliest members of the Merry Men. He was a simple man, once a miller's apprentice before the sheriff had burned his home and stolen his father's land. He had fought alongside Robin for years. The idea that Much could betray them was almost unthinkable. But Robin had learned long ago that desperation could twist even the kindest souls. That night, while the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Robin kept watch. The thought of betrayal weighed heavily on his mind. He trusted his men, but he also knew the power of fear and hunger. If one of them had indeed sold him out, he had to find out before it was too late. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Near dawn, Robin noticed a shadow moving near the edge of camp. The figure was cautious, glancing around before slipping into the trees. Robin followed silently, keeping to the darkness, his footsteps soundless against the damp earth. Much. Robin's heart sank as he saw the young man move swiftly through the forest, weaving between the trees until he reached a small clearing. There, waiting for him, was a hooded figure. Robin couldn't see the stranger's face, but he saw the flash of chainmail beneath the cloak. A soldier. Much handed something over, a small parchment. The soldier nodded, slipping a small purse into Much's hands before disappearing into the darkness. For a long moment, Much stood there, staring down at the gold in his hands, his face pale. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back toward camp, only to find Robin standing in his path. Much froze, his eyes widening in horror. "Our Robin." Robin stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have something to tell me, Much?" Much stammered. I was just..." Robin's voice was quiet, but firm. "How long?" Much's lips trembled. I never meant to betray you." Robin exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. His heart ached with disappointment. "Then what do you call this?" He gestured toward the purse of gold. Tears welled in Much's eyes. "My mother is sick, Robin. She's starving. My sister, she's just a child. I couldn't let them die." Robin stared at him, his mind battling between anger and understanding. Finally, he spoke. "And what did you give them in return?" Much hesitated, then pulled the parchment from his cloak and handed it to Robin. Robin unrolled it. His blood ran cold. It was a map of Sherwood. Detailed. Precise. The sheriff now knew every hiding place, every secret path, every supply stash. Robin's grip tightened on the paper. He looked at Much, his heart breaking. "You didn't just betray me," Robin said softly. "You betrayed all of us." Much dropped to his knees. "Robin, please, have mercy. I swear, I didn't tell them everything. I only gave them what they asked." Robin held up a hand, silencing him. His mind raced. He knew that by now, the sheriff's men would already be preparing an attack. They had to leave. Now. Robin turned away. "Wake the others." Much scrambled after him. "Robin, what about me?" Robin stopped. His back was to Much, his face hidden in shadow. "You made your choice," he said quietly. "Now you must live with it." With that, he walked into the darkness, leaving Much standing there, trembling. The merry men had been betrayed. And soon, Sherwood would burn. The siege of Sherwood. The moment Robin stepped back into camp, his voice rang out like a commander's call to battle. "Wake up," he shouted, his voice urgent. "Gather your weapons, your supplies, we must leave." The merry men, groggy and confused, roused from their sleep, rubbing their eyes as they saw the grim expression on Robin's face. Little John was the first to reach him, frowning deeply. "Robin, what's happened?" Robin barely hesitated as he tossed the map of Sherwood onto the makeshift wooden table in the center of camp. The men gathered around, eyes scanning the parchment, their faces darkening with realization. Much, still pale and shaking, stood at the edge of the firelight, watching as the truth settled in. "It was Much," Robin said, his voice heavy with both sorrow and urgency. He's been feeding the sheriff information. Gasps rippled through the group. Will Scarlet stepped forward, his fists clenched, anger burning in his eyes. You traitorous dog, he spat, turning toward Much. You led them right to us. I had no choice. Much stammered, taking a step back. My family. Little John stepped between them before one could strike. Enough, he said, his deep voice rumbling. Robin, what do we do? Robin exhaled sharply. The sheriff knows our hiding places, our secret paths. He'll come with everything he has. We cannot stay here. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Sherwood had been their home, their sanctuary. The thought of leaving it felt like cutting away a part of themselves. But they had no choice. Gather what you can carry, Robin ordered. We'll leave before dawn. The first horn blast came just before sunrise. A warning call. One of their scouts, stationed high in the trees, blew it twice before the sound was cut off abruptly. Silence. Then, the thunder of hooves. Robin's heart hammered as he turned toward the northern edge of camp. Through the mist, figures emerged, rows of soldiers in the sheriff's colors, armored and armed. Behind them, war horses snorted, their breath fogging in the crisp morning air. At the center of it all, on a black stallion, the sheriff of Nottingham sat, his lips curled into a smug smile. Robin Hood, his voice rang through the trees. There's nowhere left to run. Behind him, a second group of soldiers appeared on the opposite side of the camp. They were surrounded. Robin's mind raced. He had expected an attack, but not this quickly, and not this many men. To arms! Little John roared. The camp erupted into chaos. Arrows flew through the trees, slicing through the morning mist. Merry men grabbed their bows and blades, fighting through the waves of soldiers pouring into the camp. Robin drew his sword, blocking a strike from a soldier before countering with a swift slash. The man fell, and Robin moved to the next. His instincts took over, dodging, parrying, striking with precision. To his left, Will Scarlet fought fiercely, his twin daggers flashing as he cut down foes. To his right, Marian, disguised in her hood and leathers, fought with her short sword, her movements graceful and deadly. But the enemy was too many. One by one, their defenses fell. Their supplies were set ablaze. Their tents collapsed under the weight of attacking soldiers. And then, Robin heard the words that made his blood turn cold. Fire the tar. Robin spun just in time to see a soldier hurling a flaming torch into the trees. The ancient oaks of Sherwood caught fire instantly. Flames roared to life, leaping from branch to branch, engulfing the forest in an orange inferno. The smoke thickened, burning their throats, blinding them. Robin turned, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a battle. It was an extermination. Sherwood was burning, and they were trapped inside it. Fall back. Robin's voice pierced the chaos. Get to the river. The merry men obeyed, breaking away from the fight and retreating through the smoke, dodging flames and arrows. Robin turned to Marian, grabbing her hand. We have to go. She hesitated, looking around. Where's little John? Where's Will? Robin scanned the battlefield. His men were scattered, some cut down, others desperately trying to flee. Little John was wounded, leaning on his axe for support. Robin cursed under his breath. "We get them, or we all die here." Together, he and Marion fought their way to Little John, helping him to his feet. But Will Scarlet was nowhere to be seen. Robin whirled around, his chest tightening. "Will!" No answer. The fire raged closer, eating through the trees, forcing them back. "Robin, we have to move," Marion urged, tugging at him. Robin hesitated for a heartbeat too long. Then, a sharp, piercing cry from the tree-line. Robin turned just in time to see Will Scarlet dragged to the ground by soldiers. Robin lunged forward, but the flames and smoke swallowed him whole. Marion grabbed Robin's arm, yanking him back. "Robin, no! It's too late." Robin fought against her grip, his heart breaking, but deep down, he knew she was right. Will was gone. And if they didn't escape now, they would be too. With one final look at the inferno that had once been their home, Robin turned and ran. They reached the river just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Coughing, covered in soot and blood, Robin collapsed onto the bank. Little John groaned, clutching his wounded shoulder. Marion knelt beside him, pressing a cloth to the wound. The survivors, what little remained of them, gathered around, staring back at the smoking ruins of Sherwood. Robin felt hollow. His home, his sanctuary, gone. His men, his family, scattered. And Will. Robin clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The sheriff had taken everything from him. And Robin swore, as the rising sun cast its golden light upon the smoking trees, that he would take it back. A reckoning in Nottingham. The ashes of Sherwood still clung to Robin's cloak as he crouched beneath the cover of night, his heart pounding in his chest. The distant glow of Nottingham Castle loomed ahead, its torches flickering in the darkness. His hands gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, rage simmering beneath his skin. Beside him, Marion and Little John knelt, their faces grim, their breaths slow and measured. Behind them, what little remained of the merry men waited, scattered figures lurking in the shadows. They had lost everything, their camp, their home, their family. Will Scarlet had been taken prisoner, and Robin did not doubt for a second that the sheriff would make an example of him. "Are you sure about this?" Marion whispered. Robin didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the castle gates, where armed guards stood, relaxed, unaware of the storm that was about to break upon them. "I will not leave Will to die in that dungeon," Robin murmured. "And I will not let the sheriff believe that he has won." Little John shifted beside him, wincing as his shoulder wound throbbed. "The others, they're afraid, Robin. After what happened at Sherwood." Robin turned to him, his eyes fierce. "Fear is all the sheriff has left to use against us. If we do nothing, if we let Will hang at dawn, then we are no longer outlaws. We are cowards." Little John sighed heavily but nodded. Marion placed a steadying hand on Robin's arm. "Then we must move fast." Robin exhaled slowly, forcing himself into focus. "We go in quiet. We take out the guards one by one. We find Will, and we get out before the whole castle comes down on us." He turned to the merry men behind him. "No more running. No more hiding. Tonight, Nottingham pays for what they did to Sherwood." The first guard never even had a chance to cry out. Robin's dagger slid into his throat, quick and clean, and the man slumped silently to the ground. Marian caught him before he fell, easing his weight onto the cobblestone path. Robin signaled to the others. "Move." They slipped through the castle courtyard like shadows, avoiding torchlight, keeping to the darkened edges of stone walls. Every guard who crossed their path was taken down swiftly, their bodies hidden before alarm could be raised. They moved like ghosts. At last, they reached the prison tower. The iron-barred door loomed ahead, locked tight. Robin turned to Marian, who was already reaching into her belt, pulling out a set of thin, sharp lockpicks. Marian knelt before the door, inserting the picks into the heavy lock. "Give me a moment," she whispered. Little John kept watch as Robin's heartbeat quickened. Every second they spent here was a risk. One wrong move, and the entire castle would come crashing down upon them. Marian's fingers worked deftly, her breath steady despite the tension. Then, a soft click. The door swung open. Robin slipped inside first, moving swiftly down the damp, foul-smelling corridor lined with cells. "Will?" he whispered. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, a weak, rasping voice. "About time." Robin rushed to the source of the voice, his stomach clenching at what he saw. Will Scarlet sat slumped against the stone wall of his cell, his face bloodied and bruised. His wrists were bound in iron cuffs, and a thick chain was fastened around his ankles. His usual sharp grin was gone, replaced by something haunted. Robin felt rage rise in his chest. The sheriff had made sure Will suffered. "Hold on," Robin murmured, reaching for his dagger. With precise movements, he cut the bindings, then grasped Will's arm, helping him stand. Will winced, but his eyes still gleamed with defiance. "Thought you might have forgotten about me," he muttered. Robin managed a small smirk. "Not a chance." Just as they turned back toward the exit, a loud clang rang through the dungeon. The alarm bell. Marian cursed under her breath. "They've found the bodies." Robin tightened his grip on Will. "Then we need to move. Now." The escape was no longer silent. The castle was awake now. Guards poured into the halls, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Robin and the others fought their way through the corridors, blades flashing, arrows flying. Little John swung his massive axe, clearing a path through the soldiers. Marian moved with deadly grace, her dagger striking true. Robin grabbed a fallen crossbow, turned, and fired, a bolt sinking into a guard's chest just before he could reach Will. The air was filled with the clang of steel, the roar of battle. As they reached the courtyard, Robin saw the sheriff himself standing atop the castle steps, his face twisted with fury. "Kill them all," the sheriff bellowed. Robin gritted his teeth. They would not die here. "To the gates," he shouted. His men followed, cutting through the wave of soldiers. Robin led the charge, grabbing a fallen torch and hurling it into a pile of barrels. The flames erupted instantly, engulfing the courtyard, forcing the guards to retreat. Marian and Little John slammed open the main gate, and the merry men flooded into the night, their escape narrow but victorious. Robin turned for one final look. The sheriff stood at the burning entrance of his castle, his eyes filled with hate. Robin raised his bow, aimed, and fired. The arrow missed by inches, embedding itself into the wooden frame beside the sheriff's head. A message. The sheriff's lip curled. "You'll never win, Hood," he roared. Robin smirked. "We already have." With that, he turned and vanished into the forest, his people at his side. As they reached the safety of the trees, the night air cool against their burned skin, the reality of their survival set in. They had saved Will. They had escaped the sheriff's trap. But Sherwood was still gone. Robin turned to his men, what little remained of them. Their faces were worn, tired, but determined. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice steady. "The sheriff thinks he's won, but he's wrong." He looked back toward the castle, its flames still smoldering in the distance. "We will rebuild. We will rise again. And when we do, Nottingham will know that Robin Hood is still here." The men nodded, their fists tightening around their weapons. Their fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The final battle. The wind whispered through the ashes of Sherwood, carrying the memories of the past. The once great forest, the sanctuary of outlaws and rebels, had been reduced to blackened stumps and smoldering ruins. Robin Hood stood among the ruins, his cloak billowing behind him, his green hood pulled low over his eyes. His heart ached, but there was no time for mourning. The sheriff thought he had won. He thought that by burning the forest and scattering the merry men, he had ended the rebellion. But he was wrong. Robin clenched his fists as the survivors of Sherwood gathered around him. Their numbers were small, too small, but their spirits burned brighter than ever. They had lost their home, but they still had their cause. And now, it was time to strike back. Robin turned to Little John, Marion, and Will Scarlet, who, despite his wounds, stood tall and ready for battle. "This ends tonight," Robin said, his voice steady. "No more running. No more hiding. We take Nottingham. We take everything back." Will smirked, though his face was still bruised. "I thought you'd never say it." Little John gripped his axe. "We'll follow you, Robin. Just say the word." Robin looked at Marion. "Are you with us?" She smiled, determination flashing in her eyes. "Always." As night fell, Nottingham prepared for a feast. The sheriff sat comfortably in his grand hall, sipping expensive wine, surrounded by lords and noblemen. They laughed and toasted his victory, raising their goblets in celebration. Outside, the streets were filled with soldiers, their patrols doubled. The sheriff was paranoid, expecting an attack. He wasn't wrong. Robin and his men waited just beyond the city walls, hidden in the dark. The plan was simple. The castle gates were strong, but not unbreakable. Little John and his strongest men would ram the main entrance, drawing the guards' attention. Meanwhile, Robin, Marion, and Will would scale the eastern wall, slipping into the castle undetected. And then, the real battle would begin. The first roar of impact shook the city. Little John's battering ram slammed against the wooden gates, sending a thunderous echo through the streets. Guards shouted in alarm, rushing to the main entrance. At the same time, Robin and his team climbed the walls, their movements swift and silent. By the time the guards at the top noticed them, it was too late. Robin's dagger flashed, cutting through the first soldier's throat. Marion struck the second before he could raise an alarm. The castle was theirs. Robin didn't waste a second. He led the charge through the corridors, his sword cutting down every guard who stood in his way. The castle erupted into chaos, soldiers scrambling to defend their lord. And then, Robin reached the grand hall. The sheriff sat at the head of the table, his face twisting in shock as Robin kicked the doors open. For a moment, silence fell over the room. Then, the sheriff laughed. "You're either brave," he said, standing, "or a fool." Robin smiled coldly. "I'd say you're about to find out." The sheriff drew his sword, his noble guests scrambling away from the table. "You're nothing, Hood," he sneered. "A rat scurrying in the ashes of his own failure." Robin's grip tightened on his sword. "And yet," he said, "here I am." The fight was brutal. The sheriff was a skilled swordsman, and for every strike Robin threw, the sheriff countered with equal force. Their blades clashed again and again, the sound ringing through the hall. Robin dodged a wild swing, then countered, his blade slicing across the sheriff's arm. The sheriff staggered back, snarling in pain. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. Robin didn't answer. He pressed forward, forcing the sheriff back toward the great stone fireplace. The fire behind him roared, casting long shadows across the hall. And then, Robin saw his opening. The sheriff lunged, his blade aiming for Robin's heart. But Robin was faster. He sidestepped, grabbed the sheriff's wrist, and drove his dagger deep into the man's chest. The sheriff's eyes widened in shock. He stumbled backward, clutching the wound, gasping. "You!" he rasped, his legs giving out. He fell against the stone fireplace, his body slumping to the ground. Robin watched him die. The once powerful ruler of Nottingham, the man who had burned Sherwood and hunted the merry men, was gone. And with him, his reign of terror ended. By dawn, Nottingham belonged to the people again. The sheriff's men, leaderless and broken, surrendered. The prisoners were freed, and the noble lords who had feasted in the great hall were driven out. Robin stood atop the castle walls, looking down at the cheering crowds below. The people had suffered for too long. Now, they were free. Beside him, Marian took his hand. "It's over," she whispered. Robin exhaled slowly, watching the sunrise paint the sky gold and crimson. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." She smiled. "And what now, Robin Hood?" Robin turned to the people of Nottingham. They still needed a leader. They still needed a protector. And as long as there was tyranny, as long as there were injustice and greed, Robin Hood would be there. Fighting. Standing against the corrupt. Taking from the rich. Giving to the poor. Forever a legend. That's the story of Robin Hood. Hopefully this story can help you sleep. Good night.